Okay, so that's the recording away there now. We're going to have some presentations at the start of the session, but then we do also have a Q&A segment after those. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A function within Teams. So it's not the chat function. The chat function is turned off, but next to that, you should have Q&A. And if you use that button and put your questions in there, we will be coming to those at the relevant part of today's webinar. Please don't post anything that's commercially sensitive, as all attendees will see your comments. We'll try and answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A. We've also had a number of questions submitted in advance, and we will be starting with those as well. And please avoid asking any scheme-specific questions. Usually these webinars, we do just have presentations and Q&A, but we are looking for a little bit more feedback from you in this webinar, and we're going to do that via Slido. There's no active polls there yet at the moment, but when we get to the relevant slides within the presentation, there'll be some polls that come up within Slido. Slido is really, really easy to use. You can either scan that QR code on your phone, or you can just go to slido.com and put in the number 1529522. And as I say, when we get to the relevant parts of the presentation, you'll see some very, very quick polls come up. We'd really, really appreciate your feedback and input. These sessions have been running on a regular basis for some time now, and it would be really helpful to understand what you want from these sessions going forward to make sure that updates are delivered in the formats that are best for you, the right frequency, etc. So when we get to the relevant parts of the presentations where they are polling, I'll remind you again how to access Slido and take part in those. So in terms on who we've got on the webinar today, we're going to hear from Paul Glendinning, Director of Energy Systems, and Jim Cardwell, Head of Energy Systems Policy at Northern Power Grid. So they're both our presenters today. In the Q&A, we're also joined by Luke Scott, Customer Manager, and Martin Hardwick, Commercial Manager, who will be part of the Q&A with Paul and Jim. We're also very grateful to be joined by Sade from NESO as well, who will be involved in the Q&A as well in answering any NESO specific questions. So in terms of today's agenda, so we're going to hear from Paul and Jim with an update from NPG on the topic. Once we get to 11 o'clock, we'll be moving to Q&A for 45 minutes and close.
Rebecca, you're going on mute.
I'm not sure who muted me there, but I'm back. So today's objectives are to provide our attendees with a clear understanding of what Northern Power Grid are doing across distribution, and also what's happening in transmission to get major customers connected, and provide you all with the latest position and outlook on connections reform and clean power 2030. Obviously, we've also, as I've mentioned, got an opportunity to answer your questions as well. And so, as I mentioned right at the start, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we'll get to those at the relevant section. Could everyone please check they're on mute, and put yourself on mute if you're not, but please don't put me on mute. Thank you. Okay. So I think that is everything for me. I'm going to hand over to Paul Glendinning, Director of Energy Systems, to kick us off. Are you there, Paul?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, got you, Paul.
None from Rebecca. We've had a few IT issues this morning at Northern Power Grid. So thanks everybody for dialing in. It's a really important time for people that want to connect and have accepted projects to connect to our Northern Power Grid network. The subject of connections has never been more in the press as it is today, and certainly in my career. And you know, connections reform is developing at pace, and in December of 24, the government published its Clean Power Action Plan, which I'm sure everybody on this call has read and gone through. And NESO have produced its final proposals for connection reform and sent that to Ofgem approval. And of course, we'll touch upon some of the timelines that we have. Sorry, we've got a bit of background noise coming through there, Rebecca. So what I want to do today is really give an opportunity to let you guys ask some questions. It's fast moving. We have a huge team on this. Our implementation plan for 2025 is proceeding in line with the timescales that's been set up. When we've been doing these sessions in 2024 and we started in 2023, we were really talking about accelerating customers who have transmission congestion problems. And to date, we've passed 34 projects totaling 1.5 gigawatts through to build with an average of 7 years acceleration from their original date. So 2024 has been quite successful for us in getting projects moving. And we must continue to start talking about getting projects moving. That's the real bonus of unlocking the transmission congestion issues, is getting project on the distribution network connected early. One of the great points that was made by the Chris Stark team was that, in essence, to get to 2030, they will require a higher proportion of projects connected, a higher number of projects connected on the distribution networks in the UK before 2030 than there would be on transmission, just simply because smaller and quicker to construct, that we can get moving on it. So this is a really significant year for 2025. And of course, as part of the Clean Power Action Plan, and we mentioned this at the last webinar, we just had the numbers revealed, that in essence, we're going to a nationally planned quota type system of what the network can take and what's required by 2030, such that in our area, battery storage, only 11% of the existing queue is actually needed. In solar, it's 75%, but on onshore wind, we can go 5 times the existing queue. So there's a gap in the market for this technology. So any developers out there with onshore wind land, maybe start looking at in 2025, coming and approaching Northern Power Grid via our heat maps and our team here about how to get those connected. And as 2025 develops, we will hear about some storage developers being turned away. That's no doubt about that. But we'll also hear that onshore wind is available to be connected, and also that projects are moving quicker through the queue and we can get things actually connected to our network. Now, we've got about 500 projects that we'll need to assess and make sure that they get revised transmission access dates. And that's part of the project up until the summer of 2025. And we'll be touching on the detail of that as we go through the slides. The other things that's going on in 2025 is everybody on this call will know the requirement for transmission impact assessment documentation and how that works. And that used to be a 1 megawatt limit for distribution networks in England and Wales. And of course, what we're trying to do is to get that up to 5 megawatts to get community energy projects and the smaller projects straight through and onto our network. We spoke last time about this new standard application form that will provide better data to the teams when we're assessing applications, and hopefully that will also be part of a fast track system to get through and really get projects connected. So I would urge all developers on this call to really put a lot of work into getting the right technical and land data to us in that new standard application form. That will help the process as we go through to the endurance system that we'll have after 2025. And when we go through the detail, you'll see when we're expecting the gate to whole queue transition to happen. And when that happens, then it'll go to an endurance solution into 2026 and 7. Now, I'm aware that we've been running these webinars, as Rebecca said, for 18 months or so, been doing them on a similar format. We took the view that we'll do regular webinars, and because it's a mass broadcast situation to our customers, So we'd like to hear from you if you want to change these into different types of sessions, have some drop-in sessions or some sessions in the north of our region, some sessions in the south of our region with more limited slides, etc. So look out for the polls and see what communications you'd like to have as we go through this very changeable times in connections. Go to the next slide, please. I think what's really important is that there's an assumption from us at Northern Power Grid that we understand the plan, but because it's a fast-moving area, we're not absolutely clear yet what the plans are going to be, because we need Ofgem approval, which in the last bullet point on the slide explains that we'll only be able to get that by the end of Q1 2025. So when that hits the press, then we'll be looking to do another webinar updating if there were any changes and what the plan's going to be. But it's just a really important point that we want to keep talking to you. We want to keep explaining where we are and answering as many questions as possible. But this is still not nailed down, and we'll need to wait until Ofgem make their approvals before we can keep going. Get the next slide, please. I think it's quite important to just to see where we are. And of course, our connections activity, customers talking to us about wanting to connect to us, the activity is still high, but obviously the market signalling out there about battery storage has now started to kick in, although we still are receiving applications for hundreds of megawatts of battery storage. That most developers now understand that battery storage applications is unlikely, but not impossible, unlikely to get through, given that only 11% of the current queue will be required. And so you can see that in the numbers there on the far right hand side of the graph, and we're expecting these webinars after 2025 into 2026 to start talking much more about demand connections than generation connections as we get through the whole queue to get to the whole queue process, and we've been through that, and we start to settle down. So very important for us to see that, and of course for you guys out there, I would just say thanks very much for not sending applications in on battery storage at the moment, because it's clear that you've picked up that messaging. Okay, if we go to the next slide, I think I'm going to hand to Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, hello, I'm Jim Cardwell, Head of Energy Systems Policy. I'm responsible for our transmission interface team. And as Paul's just said, just give you an update on what we've been doing on accelerating connections, while also the rest of this presentation is actually going to be talking about connections reform and how we're working through the whole queue revision. But just before we started that, I just wanted to talk about what we have been doing and indeed what we're going to continue to do through 2025. I think this is probably a similar format to the one we showed not only 2 months ago, or just under 2 months ago. It was in middle of December, and these numbers in the bottom left-hand corner there at that time were maybe about 1.1 gigawatts. So since then we've ticked up in terms of done more there. And just give you an idea what 1.5 gigawatts means. I mean, currently in Northern Power Grid, we've got about 5.3 gigawatts of generation connected to our network, generation storage. So, significant uptick, and that acceleration that Paul mentioned. I think the key thing about moving forward into 2025 is we have been making offers, and we're now looking to see that going forward, we expect to make more accelerated offers, but do it in a way that's mindful of the Clean Power 2030 capacity allocations in particular that are coming through. And I guess our motive here, our objective, is that we don't want to be accelerating projects that then through reform get demoted from the transmission queue and end up with not having transmission system access, because that's not going to help you as customers. So what we're looking to do is try and introduce a filter on the front end of our technical limits offering that we're giving, and only give those technical limits offers to those projects with a high likelihood of achieving to get into those capacity allocation buckets. So that's the main change, I guess, that's in motion at the moment as we try and work out how to do that, and essentially make sure that we continue to deliver something that is of value to customers, but also make sure that we don't waste your time, and we don't end up with giving you a problem later on where we can avoid it. Next slide, please, Becca. This is a reminder. So this is where all the glorious detail is. Sade and her colleagues at NESO were very, very, very busy. A number of you will have been involved in the dialogue, maybe the code modification groups, the industry discussions, and with stakeholders that gave rise to these publications that have a purple hue to them on this slide, which are all the connections reform recommendations. And it's all those that are now going to that Ofgem approval box, and Ofgem are working through that at the moment, doing their impact analysis and looking to see if they can give that a big green light. And of course, in the meantime, the other bit of the NESO's work that's been through the approval process, because it's been issued by government, is the Clean Power Action Plan that Paul mentioned earlier. So these are just sort of helpful links. I mean, what we're doing here is not seeking to, certainly not overwrite these, but try to summarise these in a sort of an accessible way and give you a window in, so that if you want to dive into any of the detail, you've got a sort of a way to do that, with us giving you some of the big key content from those and how it affects you as customers, because ultimately we think that's what really matters, so that you know what your part is to play in this process, and you can assess how this may affect your project going forward, either with the existing queue or the new projects that are going to come through the course of this year that haven't yet got transmission access. Let's go forward, please. Okay, so I'm going to build up here. So this is about the existing queue. And by that we mean, so if you already have transmission system access, you're on the Appendix G, you've got a position with your project. And it might not be a position you like, because it might be far into the future, which is what we're trying to sort here. But this is all about those of you with existing projects. So I'm just going to unwrap that a bit. So let's advance a little bit, please. And the first thing is those green lines. That is the Gate 2 window. So that is what we're working to. That's our first objective through the course of this year. We haven't put the exact dates on because they're not nailed down yet, because it all depends on the Ofgem approval. But it's kind of in that sort of May, June kind of time, end of May into middle of June is our best view at the moment of when that Gate 2 window is going to be opening. And as you can see from those yellow triangles on the left-hand side, the key thing is here that the projects that are going into the existing queue has now been determined, in the sense that those of you who accepted your distribution offers, if you accepted those by the middle of January, by that date there, then the vast majority of those have got into transmission system, the application process, project progression, modification application, that process that we know and love, prior to the transmission system, prior to NESO calling the pause on new applications. So effectively, the NESO is no longer open for new applications to come. There is a pause in process that's probably going to go largely up to that window, and then it's going to be reopened, and I'll come back to that in a moment in terms of what that means. But at the moment, what NESO is doing is saying, no, that's the number of jobs we've got here that we need to assess for transmission system access. So this is this was the last opportunity to get into this first gate in this new assessment process of the whole queue that's going on in the green bars. So let's move forward just one, please. I guess the next thing to say is then, so for those customers that have only just applied effectively for transmission system access through our sales raising project progressions on behalf of those customers, then it's going to be a very busy April and May period and the period up to that. So the key point is that those offers coming back from NESO are going to be effectively an indicative offer, if you like, a bit like the step 1 offers for those in the process, if that means anything to you, or the gate 1 equivalent offers, another phrase that you might ring true with you. So it's an indicative date. It's not going to have a price. It's just going to be indicative date. So actually and then we those bilateral contracts, the BCAs, we've then got to sign those in a window probably before that date actually, but anyway, but before the gate 2 opens, we've got to agree that, and that's going to set the final number. So we say circa 500 because it really depends on how many of those projects that do get accepted. But that's the key process for us as networks, and so you might expect some interaction with you as customers as well in that period as we get those offers back. But ultimately, we anticipate that the vast majority of those will be accepted, because there'll be potentially, from a customer perspective, every reason for you to want to secure that access and be assessed in the whole queue, and very little reason to not want to accept those offers, particularly when the offer is going to be fairly, as I said, fairly limited in terms of what information it gives. It's just going to give you a time period that's likely, as it stands, going into the whole gate 2 to whole queue process and revision of this existing queue. So let's go forward, please, and talk about the Ofgem approval. So as Paul said, Ofgem and Ofgem themselves have said, end of Q1 is what they're aiming for their Ofgem decision, and whenever that is in March, assuming they do approve it, and that's the assumption we are planning on and that we are implementing on, albeit with the, I guess, the ready to change tack if we need to. But essentially, from a customer perspective, we'll be asking customers to start to submit evidence to ourselves, and I'm going to go on to talk about what that evidence is from that point forward. So we're going to be writing out to customers as soon as we've got the green light from Ofgem. So everything we're doing at the moment is getting ready for that, including this webinar, to give you sight of what's coming up in the future, so we can then do that. And importantly, if you're a distribution connectee, then your data, your information is coming through us, and then onto NESO during that gate 2 window. But the sooner you can get it to us, the better, because it gives us more opportunity to check it, get back to you, make sure that we've corrected anything that needs correcting, and give more opportunities for that correction of that information, essentially, because what we don't want to do is time out and so that you lose out because it was all just too late, and there was just not enough time to sort out any issues that we've got with the data. Next advancement, please, Becca. Thank you. So gate 2 window closes in that period there. That green box at the bottom says the queue order, if you like, is going to be set on a different basis to that which the queue order is currently in our Appendix G. For consistency across transmission and distribution, it's going to be the NESO counter-signature date on those bilateral contracts they hold with us that's going to be the determining order for that. So I guess that's just a flag to say don't be surprised if some of the order changes a bit, but we don't expect it to change markedly from what the queue order GSPs that's there today. Next, please, Becca. And I guess key thing here is there's going to be a couple of opportunities here for us to update you in probably June to give you sort of just to confirm where you stand in the process, and July probably we expect the NESO to say, right, these are the projects that are going forward now into the reform of the queue, and these are the projects that are not going to get a gate 2 offer through the course of this process, and we'll be able to give you that information we expect in July, so at least you know where you stand in the process, whether you're in that resort, if you like, where you might get promoted or demoted, or whether you're out of it and you're not going to get a gate 2 offer through this process. Next, please. And then we expect towards the end of the year, and the exact details, I mean, you can see the to be confirmed, the TBC at the top of this slide, and this is one of those areas where it's yet to be confirmed, but we expect in the back end of the year that we'll be getting the offers from NESO for all of our customers, such that it's after that date that we can then start to get that to you, but that's not all certain. Some of it might go into 2026. We just don't know at the moment. It's just we've got to wait and see. I guess this is the further we get away, we haven't had the Ofgem approval yet, it becomes harder to call and be with any certainty. Next one, please, Becca. So yeah, so there we go. So the key outcomes of this process are you get notified of your qualification for queue reform in July 2025, and then you get the outcomes of that in the winter period as to how where if you're in the queue reform, where you've ended up through that, and what your new transmission offer is that you'll get notified by us. Next, please. So this now is looking at the new offers. So this is about customers that accept you. If you've accepted your distribution offer beyond the middle of January, you haven't made the existing queue and that previous process we talked about, we're now heading towards another gate, and this is where we get again a little bit more uncertain, quite frankly, about the yellow bar. There's only one yellow bar here to signify that's roughly where the gate is going to be, but we certainly don't have dates for gate opens, gate closes with any certainty at the moment. But this is the first of the so-called enduring gate 2 windows for new projects, people who, if you are a customer and you haven't yet accepted your distribution offer, or you did it after the middle of January, then this is the process you're going to be in. So next, please. So there's the date. Certainly, if you're on or after the 16th of January, this is a process for you. Next, please. First, the enduring windows. So we expect to get a clock start maybe in December, and that queue will now be set. The date for that will be set by the date the customer met met the gate 2 criteria. Next, please. So we expect that that's when we expect to get the offers through. If we had the clock start in December. Next, please. And that's when we'll have had to accept them. Next, please. So you're notified of essentially the transmission outcomes in spring of 2026. I guess is our best view at the moment. Maybe even going into summer or the early part of summer, but we'll yet say. And then finally, of course, then this is now the future world we're into now. So when we get to this part in this, we've gone beyond. We've gone after the 2025, which is very unusual. This whole kind of transition across with the existing projects, we're now into a new rolling world of 6 monthly windows that we'll then get into. So Becca, I'm going to hand back to you. It's poll time, I think.
Brilliant, thanks Jim. Yeah, so this is the first of today's polls. So if you're not there already, if you could head to slido.com, you can scan the QR code, or in a browser or on your phone, you can put slido.com and then input this number 1529522. And ultimately, the first question we want to hear from you from is, what connections reform topics would you like more information on? As Paul said right at the start of the call, these webinars have been ongoing for 18 months now, perhaps even slightly longer than that actually, and so getting some input from you about what you would like from updates going forward is really key. I can see some of you in the background there typing out your responses. That's great. I will just remind you all as well that we do have a Q&A section towards the end of the webinar. You can submit questions. Some of you have already done that in advance, and we will start with those questions. But within the Q&A section of this meeting, so not the chat, the Q&A button, you can submit questions there. Any questions that we don't get to today, we will follow up afterwards, and typically we will circulate the slides from this session, the recording, and a full Q&A of all the questions that have been asked. So I can still see we've got quite a few people typing away in the background there. So we'll leave the poll open for a little bit longer there. We've definitely some in the word cloud there. We can see some themes coming up in terms of timings, financial instrument, progression, demand applications. We have still got several people typing in the background there. So I will just give it one more minute, and then I'll hand back to Jim to keep going with the presentation.
Just as an idea, Becca, live, maybe we could leave it open in the background while, if that's possible, while I continue talking.
No problem. Okay, I will move on.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for those inputs. It's really good to see. I mean, my takeaway from having seen that screen was there's a lot of variety in there, but there's some bigger ones that come through. So, but it's good to get your feedback. So this is the process the rest of this presentation is going to focus on, which is the process by which we're going to take through for the existing projects. So that's where we wanted to focus. That's here and present, if you like, timings was mentioned on the previous one, for example, on that Slido poll, for example, and we're going to try and concentrate on that and let you know where you stand on that. So the process is in the green. First off, we've got to work out which of the 500 projects. I've talked you through some of that process already. I'll say a bit more about that. Then there are protection checks, and I'll say a bit. That's otherwise called grandfathering. What rights have you got to be protected from some of the assessments that are going on? We've got readiness checks in the orange. We've got needed assessments. That's the Clean Power 2030, and then that will push forward to get us a revised queue. So let's move forward. I'm going to stick in the green to start with, which is about forming that sort of list of 500 projects. And this is the first one. So Paul's already mentioned it, the transmission impact assessment. So it's a proposal. It's going through a code modification group in CUSC at the moment, an urgent code modification group that NESO are running through there as the administrator. And it's all about seeing if we can improve the efficiency of the process by enabling smaller distributed generation where we don't think that they're going to have a significant impact on the transmission system, to just get connected without having to go through a transmission impact assessment. So that's what the proposal is all about. And the key point is, and this is why we're talking about it right up front, is it could affect some of the existing projects. So that number of 500 could come down a bit if this is approved in quick time before that gate 2 window, because it just means that some of our projects, if you've got a small project below 5 megawatts, if it's approved, then you won't have to go through the gate 2 to whole queue, and you'll be given a green light to connect, and it'll be a distribution only connection rather than having any impact or any relevance to transmission. So that's why it's really quite important to understand at the front end if you're holding and developing one of those smaller projects, it has quite a material impact on you and gives you some certainty about progression earlier in the process than otherwise you would have. So but of course, it's also a code modification to talk about those future periods. It's not just about this year. It's an enduring new way of running it. So it'll have impact on those yellow windows in the other slide, on those new enduring windows as well. So let's move it forward, please, Becca. And still in that kind of what's in the queue, if you like, and how are these projects going to be move forward. So hybrids is a key one. I think we might have had a question on hybrids as well already. We've got one eye on the questions coming in. So hybrids are going to be treated dependent on the impact on the transmission system, is the key point. And essentially, so the couple of examples that we've got here. So let's talk about PV and storage in those examples, because that is the most common hybrid arrangement, as many of you will be well aware, and some of you will have those as projects. So where there's two types here that in the examples that we've pulled out in the bullet points. So the first is where the import's behind the meter. So effectively there's only the export is having an impact on transmission, and there's no import requirement from the network because it's being dealt with on site, if you like. And the needed criteria, the capacity bucket allocation buckets that Clean Power 2030 will only be applied to the PV technology. And then otherwise, if it is a scheme where you are importing from our network, and then essentially you could have an impact on the transmission network, then that's a different situation where both technologies. So what will happen is NESO will go through, looking through the stack of projects. They'll have a certain amount of allocation of solar PV and a certain amount of allocation of storage. So for that scheme to be retained in the queue or accelerated in the queue, it will need to have sufficient capacity available through the Clean Power 2030 allocations for both. And obviously, bearing in mind the headlines that Paul's already led with, where we see that storage, there's a lot of storage that's not needed by the system according to Clean Power. That means that a number of projects will not get the storage, but maybe have a greater likelihood of getting the solar PV allocation, in which case customers will be given the opportunity to decide whether, as a customer, whether you want to proceed with the solar PV only and drop the battery or not, or whether you want to keep the whole scheme intact, which might mean then that your scheme would not be in the queue in that scenario, if you like, going forward. So that's what's going on with hybrids. We can come back to that in the Q&A if there's any more on that. Let's move forward, please. Project designation is another one which affects the whole right at the very start of the process. I guess the key thing is here, there's a number of criteria that apply to that. that you might have read about. So this is essentially about saying if there's something unique or special about your project, it has to qualify one of those criteria at the bottom, then ultimately you might get an acceleration and avoid having the scrutiny of whether you meet the needed criteria, etc. The one on the right hand side, needed beyond 2035, is much more likely to be a transmission related one. You know, that could be the sort of nuclear power station kind of end of the scale. I suppose we're more likely to see potentially some of the others. But the key point is here that in terms of the timing of this, NESO is going to be updating the guidance on this, and will be reaching out to any existing projects that it believes could be meeting some of these criteria, and then that would be considered in the gate 2 to whole queue, the new queue reforming this year. Any new projects that come along that come onto our network and then ultimately go forward with a project progression in the middle part of this year, you're now talking about, will not go into the existing queue, that green one, into the yellow process. So you're more likely to be, you will only be considered in the beyond November kind of process on that. So it's not going to give you an advancement in that stage. So I guess the key point is look out for more guidance coming out. If you believe, and we do not believe that there's many jobs that are going to qualify for this distribution. However, if you think you do, then look out for more guidance coming up. Look out for an approach from NESO. Raise your hand through us, or go through us to NESO if you think that you do qualify for this and you haven't heard anything, and then we can raise that case and understand whether you do or you don't. And but it's just another important part of understanding the framework of what's running here. But as I said, I think it's probably edge cases rather than the generality affected by this. So let's move forward. And I think we're going to go into, so this is about, when it comes to it, submitting your information. So as you can see in the grey box there, and I've already mentioned, for this year and likely for future years, but hold that thought. Let's just concentrate on this first one. If you're distribution connected, you're going to be sending your data for these assessments, and for which I'm going to move on to us, and then we're going to be sending it to NESO. And one of the things we're doing at the moment is, in common with other DNOs, you might have heard this as well, we're developing a bit of a portal to allow you to do that, so that when Ofgem, assuming that Ofgem approves these reforms, and as you heard me say earlier, we'll then come to you and say, we'd now like to get your information. You should expect that we'll be sending you a portal so you can send your information through to us. And this is principally so that it enables with the sort of size of some of the files we're talking about. So a lot of scanned images. It's also going to help us to manage those better than we would with emails and things like that. And it also will enable us to get back to you more quickly and work through that process with you, and keep essentially an audit record as well for you and for us of the dialogue as we work through any gaps in that information, and make sure we collate all the bundles of information that are going to be needed for us to submit then to NESO, for NESO to form its decisions on either the ready or needed criteria. But it's mainly the readiness criteria that we're talking about here. So yeah, look out for that. Let's move forward, please, Becca. I'm going to talk about protections now. So we've moved on to that blue box, which is now talking about specifically how you're going to be dealt with as we move through the queue here. The two in red are most likely to have more of an impact at distribution, but we also recognise certainly some of the contracts, capacity markets examples, there will be some at distribution, so we're not blind to that, absolutely not. But these are the key sort of aspects, and this is all about, as I said earlier, grandfathering. It's all about those projects that are significantly progressed, having not having to go through all the criteria in terms of being assessed for whether they get a transmission queue position, and where in the queue that is as we move forward. So I've got one more slide on this, Becca, just come please, which is the just to sort of outline some of these things. So there's a couple of criteria that are applying. So different criteria apply to different jobs, if you like, and this might be a case for having a bit of a deep dive on this particular topic for those interested. So do let us know through that feedback we're seeking today whether you think that'd be of benefit to you. But suffice it to say, there's a couple of areas which apply right now to this year, and then there's a couple that apply more to the enduring Gate 2 windows the first of those enduring Gate 2 windows in November. And of course, because this is about dealing with the existing queue, if you like, and giving you rights to proceed, this is something that really affects the arrangements this year and does not have relevance then to anything from next year onwards. So in those terms of those bullets, and the two this year, the first one is for those customers that are most advanced, if you like, have got connection dates getting on before the end of 2026, and you've got the planning and financial commitment. And then the second one is again some protections, but it might be that the connection dates will be subject to change. So you've got planning that was submitted before the 20th of December last year, and then either the planning's been achieved, or you've got the financial commitment for those projects not requiring planning, or you've got one of those following that are in that list there. So there's a real sort of kind of series of gates and things to be considered here, which is why I say it gets pretty complex pretty quickly. But all those are about saying you'll get protected from the application of the capacity allocation buckets of Clean Power 2030. And then moving forward to the first enduring window, there's the first one there is for those that just miss, if you like, the planning for this existing projects window in the middle of this year. And then there's another one then for those similar kinds of, whether you contract for difference, capacity market contract, etc., where you're 2027 plus. So it's just so it's about allowing you access into the next window rather than the green one. And the key point at the bottom of this is, and this actually, whether you are seeking protection or believe that you are eligible for protection or not, a key feature of this whole management and processing of your projects through this process is that you'll be needing to signal whether you want advancing from where you are currently today. It won't happen automatically, if you like. So you'll need to say if you want to move forward in the queue. I expect the majority of you would say yes, but it's a really key point to stress that will be required, and we'll be making sure that we give you that opportunity through those processes as you submit your data to us. Let's move forward, please. And I'm going to move to land rights. So this is the readiness. So you can see on the little icon on the top right box there, the orange box. We're talking now about the readiness criteria. And I'm certainly not going to read these out. There's all sorts there. This is a really important area. And when I talked about that portal, this is exactly the key point of us opening that portal, to give you the opportunity to submit these documents and submit these bits of information, so we can check them all through a standard process and make sure you get every opportunity to show how you qualify for these criteria and able to move you forward. Next one, please. The readiness declaration, so this is still in the readiness criteria, obviously, as it goes here. These are all the aspects that are going to be on a sort of standard form, if you like, that will require a director's signature. And this is one area where we're working with NESO and the other network companies, just one area. We're working across all these, of course, but this is one where we're looking to get a standard form. So for those of you working in different parts of GB, the ambition here is that we just have one form. It's not some Northern Power Grid special. It's the same GB wide, such that you can understand this process, and it makes it more straightforward for you in that sort of standardization. And this is where advancement comes in again. That's the second from the bottom. So this is exactly the point where I said there'll be specific questions and points for you to identify, so that none of these things get missed in terms of your application. And yeah, so this is a really key part of your readiness criteria, and this is one of the really important documents that we need to hand across to the NESO in terms of saying we've done some initial checks with the customer on the readiness criteria. Here is the readiness declaration, which the NESO needs to have a look at, but also will be indicating where we think you line up against those readiness criteria for then NESO to validate and make their decisions. Next, please. So we're now moving across. It's now in the purple box. This is the Clean Power 2030 and the draft impact analysis. Paul's given you some of the headline figures, the 11, the 75, the 5 times 445, crudely rounded. And this was the same data that we gave you in December. If you were with us then, this is our best view as it stands. This is, there's data flowing beneath the surface of some of the headlines in that you saw in the Clean Power Action Plan, which is those first 2 columns of data. That's all public domain. It's all out there. This is all import above 1 megawatt at the moment. That's notwithstanding the transmission impact assessment that could change that. And also this is about demand only. So it's a really important point to say. Sorry, this is about generation only. Demand is excluded from connections reform. So if you're interested in a demand connection and transmission impact of that goes on regardless. This is about the renewables and storage that are looking to connect to the system and how much we need as a country and how much we need to process through these moves. Next one, please. So just a couple more slides from me, and then I'm going to hand back to we'll sort of close off. So on the securities freeze, I guess this is the second recent announcement from NESO, just to which many of you will know about this. So NESO has frozen the securities against cancellation liabilities that it's seeking to agree with all its connectees to its system, which in this case is Northern Power Grid, because we're the user, we're contracted with NESO. The cancellation liability has not fallen away. It's exactly the same. It's just been frozen to the level, and the way that we mitigate that cancellation liability in terms of seeking securities from you as customers, that hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that the values that we are securitizing against that cancellation liability are not changing as they normally would in terms of the standard calendar that you see represented on this slide. So they've been frozen at those levels and during this freeze. So this is about just avoiding the need to update all these things while we're updating the queue. So hopefully that makes sense. It will keep informing you as to those liabilities and the securities we need for that. Next one, please. So we'll continue to push information through our transmission interface web section on that. So the things you'll have seen pop up there in the last month will be a couple of things that we've already talked about. So the impact of the pause and the securities freeze, both have been, we've updated that information on there. So as we'll be getting onto a poll about how we communicate with you, and so bear that in mind. That'll be one of the things will be interesting to get your feedback on. Next, please. Yeah, so I think this is probably my last one. So this is about trying to sort of break down. This is having another go at the green slide of earlier, which was saying about how we're dealing with the 500 projects that we're processing through this year, and try to suggest to you as customers what you might want to be thinking about as we move forward, and also a request from you as well. So where we can work with you. So as we go left to right, then we're already in the phase of, we announced this in December, which is, look, there's lots of information out there. We'll do our best to help you to demystify it and guide you through it. But at times you're going to have to want to get in touch with that information direct, and that's why we've given you the links. We'll keep communicating through webinars or other processes. Again, we'll come back to that in the poll. Confirm your contact details. So we are currently, one of the things we are really keen, clearly, to make sure we do is that every one of you, every one of those 500 projects that we push through this, that we're in good contact with you, and you don't get left behind by some kind of quirk of accident or anything else. So it's really important to us that we know every one of those projects, and we know the contact details. It's as basic as that, about making sure that in a world where there's lots of movement around, there always has been and there always will be, in terms of projects being sold on and different operators stepping in to take over projects. It's really important to us that through this process we are directly coupled with whoever is owning that project and moving that forward. So We're updating a lot of information on that at the moment. We're doing a whole root and branch survey of that, but please help us to help you. And if you're on this webinar and you've got projects in the 500 you think you have, then stick that in that, click on that link, please. It's a simple web form. Give us details of your contact details, and that will help us to make sure that we absolutely keep in contact with you. It'll just be another input into that process. So we'd rather have it twice. And even if you say, yeah, I've got this project here, and it'll allow us to clarify with you, say, well, no, you haven't. That's not in the 500. That's actually in the next window. That would also be a useful conversation, will help you as a customer to be really clear about where you are. So please click on that link. Let us know what projects you've got. Let us know your details, and that will just help us to make sure that we maintain that data set as we move forward through this very, very busy year for you and for us. So you could be thinking. Sorry, can we just go back? Bit of the line there. I'll try again. I think that's better. Right. So prepare your evidence against each project, each scheme. You should be starting to get that ready. We'll have, if there's any contracts that we've got. So one of the key things here is when we say an outstanding contract, it's really important that as we enter this process, you need to be signed on to what your existing transmission offer is. So these are at various stages. So if you're sat on a transmission offer from us, where we've relayed that to you, then you need to make sure that you are signed on to it, because if you're not, then you can't go into that gate 2 window. So please flag to us if there's a blocker there, because we need to understand what that is, and be prepared to turn some of those things around as quick as you can, because as I said, there's some quite accelerated timescales for some of that as we get nearer to gate 2 window. And then of course there's the actual submission information, which is on the final right hand side of this slide, along that when we get that portal up and get it sent through to us. And as I said earlier, the earlier you can get it into us, the more opportunity we've got to do checks on it, and then the more opportunity you've got to have a stronger and a complete, if you like, submission that we can then submit to the NESO, and you're not going to be left out of the queue reform in that window. So I think that's probably it for me now. I'll shut up now and hand over to Paul to bring us into land.
All right, if we go to the next slide, please. I'm aware that we've gone a lot of detail there today, which has been very, very useful for us to get across to you. And of course, there'll be some questions coming from those, and we need to get through those QA on this call, but then aware that there might be some more detailed thinking in the teams. Now you've seen the slides and seen where we are. And so please send in your questions. I reiterate that we're very keen to see how we can support you through this. We know up until August, September time, it's going to be flat out on this front from us and from all of your teams, and we want to work together with you. But quite clearly, we've got over 500 individual projects to deal with, so we're not going to have 2,000 individual meetings between now and September. So we'll need a way of handling that. In terms of where we are, our commitment is that we will continue to give these webinars and information updates, and we want to ask you to provide us the contact details to make sure, double check that we've got the right records per project as Jim went through, and be prepared for our information requests following the Ofgem approval in the next 6 weeks or so. Let's move to the Q&A, and it just leaves me to thank everybody for joining this morning.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Paul. So we're just going to move into our next section of polls. So if you're already on Slido, you will find they come up on your screen now, or you can rejoin again by scanning the QR code or going to slido.com 1529522. So this first set of polls is to understand your views on communication engagement from Northern Power Grid currently on this subject. So if you navigate to Slido there, you'll see a set of 5 polls where you're able to rate Northern Power Grid in terms of frequency of updates, in terms of format of updates, in terms of the content of updates, and overall how well you were kept up to date. There's also an opportunity there to suggest any improvements with free text. So the poll will only stay open for a couple of minutes, and then I will need to move on in the interest of time. So I would please encourage as many of you as possible to navigate straight here and begin to give your view. So it does look like we've got a good number of participants taking part, so thank you very much for that. That's much appreciated. In terms of scores so far, we've got 4.4 out of 5 for frequency of updates. We've got 4.1 out of 5 for the format of updates. We've got 4 out of 5 for the content of updates there. Overall, 4.2 out of 5 in terms of overall how well Northern Power Grid are keeping you, stakeholders like you, up to date in regards to these issues and solutions. And then in terms of open comments, we've got one suggestion so far. You can see we've still got a couple of people responding, so I'll just give it one more moment and then we are moving into another set of polls. Fantastic. Really appreciate you all taking part in those polls. So thank you very much for that. We do still have the Q&A section of today's event to come. We have heard some really useful detailed presentations there, which has hopefully began to respond to some of the questions that have been posted. We will answer some questions when we get to that section, and any that we don't get to, we will respond to afterwards. Okay, I'm going to move us on now to our second set of polls. So these polls are about what would be most valuable for you going forward. So you're asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 5, where none is not at all valuable and 5 is very valuable, various methods of communication, engagement, and keeping you up to date. So the first of those is more webinars like this one. The second of those is more information on Northern Power Grid's website. The third of those is a dedicated Northern Power Grid newsletter. The fourth of those is more virtual drop-in sessions on specific topics like troubleshooting. So that's similar to what Paul mentioned before in his summary there. And more communication and collaboration with other DNOs through the ENA is also one of the suggestions there. And then there is also an open box there for you to detail anything else that you would find valuable. So if I just click back, we can have a look at how scores are looking so far. So we've still got quite a few people responding to the poll, so we'll just keep it open for another couple of minutes. But in terms of how valuable more webinars like this one would be, the current score is looking like 4.3 out of 5. In terms of more information on the website, 4.3 out of 5. A dedicated MPG newsletter, slightly less there, 3.8 out of 5. More virtual drop-in sessions on specific topics, 4.7 out of 5. So that looking particularly popular out of the set of options there. And more communication and collaboration with other DNOs through the ENA, we've got at 4.2 out of 5 there. So a little bit more in the middle. And in terms of detail on anything else that you would find valuable, so open-ended Q&A sessions on any topic, greater visibility and faster response on an individual project level, and liaison to avoid clashes on kind of webinars like this going forward, which I know is something that the team are actively working on at present. Okay, I think that's pretty much where we will leave the poll there in the interest of time. So the Q&A section is still open to post your questions. So please do keep posting any questions as you think of those, and we will respond to any that we don't get to afterwards. I'm going to hand to Luke Scott now to take over the mic for the Q&A.
Thanks, Becca. Can you hear us all right?
Yes, got you, Luke.
Right, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to go into the pre-submitted questions. The first one is, will NPG provide its customers with the NESO counter signature dates for the BCAs? We require this in order to assess our actual GB-wide queue position. So just to cover this off, so in terms of the NESO guidance, the queue order information will not be released ahead of the queue being reformed. And NESO are using the BCA counter signature dates as the queue position, and we don't know who sits where until this review is complete. And this is because ID&O schemes will impact the queue, and we'll not know that until NESO's rubber stamped it and informed customers in July. So if you want to go to the next question, Martin.
Yeah, excuse me. Okay, so the next question, which I believe we had a slide on, which was the GB capacity. So I might come to Jim on this, but how much BESS and solar capacity have NPG currently got in the ECR pipeline as accepted to connect and as connected? And I think the associated question then was, what contribution to CP 2030 requirements for solar and BESS does NPG expect to make? So I think that was largely covered.
Yeah, I'd say so. I can't remember the second part of the question because I was thinking about the first part, but I'll answer the first part. So I haven't got the numbers at my fingertips, but in terms of you can kind of work it out, because in the table that was on the slide, Martin, which I think was the one you're referring to, we've put in there the Clean Power 2030 capacity allocations, and then we've said how much of the queue that is. So you can kind of you can have an approximation. You can work it out approximately.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Next question, please. Can you clarify whether you're going to reorder the queue with the project progression batches to reflect the project readiness, as well as the CP30 alignment, so that more closely reflects the changes at the transmission level? So as previously said, NESO are choosing to reform the queue with the BCA counter signature dates, but this isn't at scheme level, but it will include the batches. So in terms of batches of schemes, and the batches will be ordered on the distribution acceptance date.
Okay, so the next question, which I do think was covered, please outline NPG's understanding of the new transmission impact assessment process. Will all Appendix G processes for all GSPs be resubmitted to the Gate 2 to hold queue exercise? And the answer is yes, everything will be submitted, and NESO will approve what has been submitted.
Okay, thanks, Juan. And then the next one is evidence collection to qualify for Gate 2 accelerated connections. When are we required to submit the plan and documentation? So again, I think Jim covered this off in the slide with all the animation on around the green process. Ofgem have still got to make their decision, which is no later than 14th of March, but it may be sooner. And as soon as they rubber stamp it, DNOs are preparing now and we're ready to go out to customers to say, submit your evidence. But we're just waiting on that Ofgem decision.
And then the next question that I have here is, can NPG say what proportion of embedded generators that have signed contract variations for project progression are Gate 2 ready? And the answer to that is no, not at this stage. As there are new requirements in the Gate 2 criteria, customers are yet to officially send their information to us, as we've described in this process today.
And then the last one on the previously submitted is, what is going to happen at the capacity that is held by customers in Gate 1 who haven't met the Gate 2 criteria but are sat on a connection as such? So there's a wider conversation going around to what happens with those customers contractually, which as soon as that's concluded, we'll let you know. But at that stage where you haven't met the Gate 2, effectively you've got no transmission system access. So as I said, we'll be working through what happens to you contractually.
And the next question relates to hybrids. It's in 3 parts, some of which, most of which I think was covered by Jim's presentation. First element is, can hybrids remove a gas engine from their application, and if so, how do they do it? Which that was covered in the slides under readiness declaration. How might this affect their queue position? And the remaining generator will retain the existing queue position. And if they do need to apply, what would the process look like? And again, that was covered in the slides.
But I just think to confirm, because it came up again in another question, so a couple of times that's come up with in the readiness declaration. So when us as DNOs go out to you to say, right, you need to submit your evidence, you've got the readiness declaration, and in there's a question to say, do you wish for your technology for a technology reduction? And in that, you can reduce the megawatts, but you can also remove a scheme, and that's where you would do that for the hybrid. And then there was also a scheme that came up on the financial instrument. So Shadi, I know you're on from NESO. I'm just going to point this over to yourself. Are you happy to take that one on the financial instrument and give an update, please?
Sorry, I can't actually see the questions in the Q&A, so you can just read it out.
Yeah, so Shadi, it's just a bit of an update on, you know, the financial instrument, the 20k per megawatt, as other people are calling it. Is there an update on that, please?
So I think we're still just working on what the proposal will look like internally. But once it does go through the code modification process, or we actually put the proposal forward formally, I'm sure we'll put necessary comms out there for industry.
So thanks, Shadi. I think because you broke up a little bit there, I think that was the financial instrument is still in discussion. There's potentially going to be a code modification, and then NESO will be producing comms on that to customers to let them know on the update.
Yeah, correct.
I think, Martin, if we go to questions in the chat.
Okay, picking the older ones, or the first questions to be asked earlier on in the session. The new G99 queue entry requirement is asking for developers to submit heads of terms as part of the application, but the ENA document gave an example of exclusivity. I think, as I paused in the middle of the question, I think Paul will come to you with this one. Do we need the heads of terms signed, or just an exclusivity statement that heads of terms are being negotiated?
No, the heads of terms need to be signed by both parties.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I mean, this question's come up a couple of times. I think we may have answered it, but Elliot, I'm not sure if you want to come in. It's about how NPG are going to handle the hybrid schemes. Solar and storage as an example.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said in the chat, it'll very much depend on the nature of the project and how the hybrid's been established, whether it's been a single application for a single generation facility, or if it's been an add-on to a previous one. Yeah, but I think most of the answers to the questions have been covered in the slide, and like more helpfully pointed out, slide 22 does describe that you can drop bits off your hybrids if you don't require them anymore.
Yeah, thanks. You're a little bit quiet there, Elliot, but I guess your answer is it's been covered in the slides, and it depends on how the hybrids interacting with the transmission system. And again, I think on the polls, people are looking for more of a drop-in. I think that's one of the areas that we'll cover off on a drop-in on one particular topic.
All right, so the next question, which I am convinced has been answered in the detailed slides about the timeline, how long will we get to accept the gate to offers, and how long will we get between accepting gate 2 and milestone 1 submit planning? I'm going to come to Luke in case there's anything that's not been covered on that one.
So would you say that one again, Martin? Sorry.
So how long will we get to accept the gate 2 offers, and how long will we get between accepting gate 2 and milestone 1 submit planning?
So there's two parts about the gate. But for the gate 2 offer, if you look at Jim's slide where he went through the animations and the critical path, all NESO offers are due to be issued out by the end of this year, 2025. That's the aim. So as you're a distribution customer, the offer will come to us for us to review and make sure it's technically competent. And when that lands with us, we'll have 90 days to go back to NESO in which to approve and sign it. But within that 90 days, we then give our customers 30 days, which is just standard practice as it is today. And then when that's signed and the BCA is ready to go, the current ENA milestone guidance still applies. There is work to look at that and address that through the ENA, but there's no changes to the current guidance.
So I'll take the next one because you've just been using your voice there.
Thanks.
So Jim, I think I might come to you with this one. It's about hybrid.
Yeah.
We have a hybrid solar and storage scheme that we have requested a technical limits offer for. If you think the battery will prevent this, please let us know, as we don't mind removing the battery if that would then mean we can get a technical limits offer. So I think the answer to that's in the timing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, so as I said, so my comments were about releasing further offers and about giving more offers out and getting customers into contract for something, I guess, mindful of where it could go through the process. And I think if I understand this question correctly, It's about saying, I'm one of the 34. I've got a project already underway and I want to understand the risks to that project. So I think that's something that we should probably do, Martin, as part of that, and then enable customers to get a heads up of that and see if they want to change tack as per the question itself. So I think it's a good point.
So I'm going to tackle a couple of questions, I think. So one question in the chat is, when will we be able to submit the evidence, which is sort of covered off? But will you open that window for the evidence as long as NESO? And the answer is yes. So we propose the NESO proposal to open their evidence window is around May, but again, subject to change. But as I've already said, we're going to, like, as soon as the Ofgem rubber stamp the guidance, we're going to come out to you sooner. And then we're proposing that our window for evidence closes on the same date as the NESO, the transmission, which is in roughly July, again, to be confirmed. And there's a question in there, can we drip feed that through? Yes, ideally, if you're ready, get as much information ready, and when that opens, submit it all. But if you're not prepared, you're going to have that time from when it opens to when it closes in July to drip feed that through. But what we'd ask is, we don't want all of our, say, 500 existing customers submitting it on the last day of the evidence, because it'll make it impossible for us to go through and vet and approve. Do you want to ask a question?
Right, yes. So the next question is about the layout of the engineering drawing. So I think this might be one for Elliot. Can you provide specific guidance on the required detail level for the new layout and engineering drawings?
Martin, I think that one would be best answered by Pankaj, because he's been doing the work with the G99 stuff. I'll just hand over to him now.
Thank you.
Sorry, repeat the question, Martin.
Can you provide specific guidance on the required detail level for the new layout and engineering drawings?
So I can take that, Martin. So there's a guidance document on the Northern Power Grid website that's been put together by all DNOs through collaboration through the ANA, and in there's a good example, like of a drawing of what needs to be included, and then there's written guidance. And where you find that on the Northern Power Grid website is where you'd normally apply for your G99 application. But I'm sure I can send you the link after this along with the slides. We'll make sure that's part of the pack. That tells you exactly what you need to do. So, Paul, there's a question here for yourself from Leo Hughes. And it says, how will 75% of the queued capacity by 2030 be realised whilst all GSP queues have dates 2033 to 2037, pending reinforcement schemes?
This is a really important one for the core group to understand. Part of the purpose of the CP 2030 plan is to, in effect, clear out the top of the funnel, so that where you've got projects like ball bearings trying to get through a pipe, we're going to slim that down. So the reinforcement schemes that are in from 2033 to 2037 are clearly not going to happen. They're not there because they won't be required, because the queue is at a smaller level that we'll be able to build that capacity without transmission congestion before 2030. So that's the key thing here. We want to speed up connections to our network and get the maximum amount of renewable generation connected that will support the national push for CP 2030.
Right, next one is Michael Hill. So could NPG provide a full worked example of what information they're expecting in new and existing applications? Great question. It's something that we're working through in the background, and we will look to provide. Again, we don't want to release too much other than what's against the NESO guidance until Ofgem approve it.
Okay, the next question from Jonathan is that, Jim, this one's for you, I think, because it popped up as you were going through slide 11, which was the timeline. Please expand on the all offers to DNOs no later than end of April.
Yeah, sure. So I think that was the bit. So we're talking about April 2025, and I think the bit that we're picking up on is that this is those people, those projects that have just come in December and January and have entered the transmission assessment process. and these are the ones where NESO is now working hard to issue an indicative transmission offer, and as I said, that will just have essentially a date and just confirm the grid supply point that we're talking about. There'll be no costs associated with that, and there'll be no detail of the technical solution for doing that. And that's what's going to come through to us, and we'll have to turn around in very quick time. Luke said earlier in response to a different question about a different part of the calendar that typically we're given a 90-day window to check the technical details, to confirm with customers if we need to, and get that signed and get it back to NESO. So the idea is that NESO will issue those offers to us ahead of the Gate 2 window. That's the part of the process we're talking about, and we'll have to turn those around quickly to make sure that those are good to go, and then we can sign those offers, get those back to NESO, make sure those customers can get into the Gate 2 to whole queue, that green Gate 2 window that opens in May, June kind of time, and then can be part in contention for getting a transmission place or being accelerated through the course of the remainder of 2025. So hopefully I'm interpreting the question correctly, and I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to tackle two questions, Martin. So there was a question in there around around protections or stroke grandfathering. If I've got a connection date before 2027, so that right up the end of 2026, do I need to have achieved M2? And as per the slide, yes, you've got to achieve M2, which is otherwise known as planning. So your planning has got to have been achieved, and also prove that you've got your financial commitment, which is otherwise known as M7, milestone M7. And then Shardy, correct us if I'm wrong, there's a question in the chat around NESO fees for advancement, and will it be the same as the project progression, the statement of works fee? I believe it will be, but I just need you to clarify, and if you can't clarify, it's probably something that we need to clarify after this webinar.
Yeah, I can take that one away and get back to you if that's okay.
Thanks, Jordan.
Okay, the next question, which I believe will be answered by one of the two people in the room with me, which is Jim or Luke, is I think it's just clarification and an understanding point, but why would the NESO counter-signature dates align in any way to the current queue positions if all projects are being submitted in May? In other words, would this not significantly change queue positions?
Yeah, so that's the counter-signature date on the bilateral contract that essentially is, so when the offers come back to Northern Power Grid for our customers, and we check those offers and we accept those offers, and then the NESO does a counter-signature on that, so that contract is effectively then executed at that time. That's the date we're talking about. So of the 500 projects we've got going into Gate 2, the Gate 2 window that opens in May, June time, some of those 500 projects will have been in that queue for a long time. There may be some of you who got who secured your transmission system access offer maybe a few years ago. And then some of you may have only just got it the month before, because if you were accepting your distribution offer in December or the first part of January, then you'll be getting it very, very most recently. So that span of NESO counter-signature dates, which, as I said, is the date by which those contracts are agreed between us and NESO on behalf of our customers, will actually have quite a span of several years, because it depends on, I guess, how long you've been on the, and as I said, it should reflect largely the same order that you see on the Appendix G, but there could be some shuffles, as I said earlier, because it's not exactly the same date that's got you originally onto the Appendix G in terms of that queue order. So yeah, we do expect to see quite a difference between those, but I completely accept the point that if you're in that latest batch of customers that have gone through for transmission assessment, and we are agreeing them all in end of April, May time, you're going to have some dates that are very close to each other. So there'll be some dates that will be sandwiched together and very, right on top of each other, but there'll be some that will be years before, and that will ascertain the order. So I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Jim. So last question. I think that's all we've got time for. So how does the TMO4 framework, so TMO4 plus framework, influence containment and reinforcement when a project is delayed and pushed back in the queue due to lack of progress? So TMO4, which we're talking about the connections reform principles, which is ultimately, is the customer ready and is it needed? And I think it's just that. If the customer's not ready and not needed, then they won't get the transmission access. So, and then just probably one more, Becca, before I hand over, there's something around the slides and will the links work after the slides and will they be sent out? And yes, so the slides will be sent out after this and we'll make sure that all links are working prior to sending the go button. Thanks, Becca.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Luke, and thank you to everyone for your questions. Before we hand to close, we've just got one final poll. There's just one quick question this time, and that's to understand your overall views about today's session. This insight is really valuable. It helps us shape future sessions. So please head back to Slido and vote on this one. If you've got any other thoughts or suggestions or comments about what you would like to see from communication, updates and engagement in the future, feel free to post comments in the Q&A as well, and we'll make sure that we pick those up. As Luke said, as well as the slides, we'll make sure those links are all active, but we'll also send around the recording and a copy of the Q&A, including answers to any questions that we didn't manage to get to today, and any questions that we needed to follow up outside of the webinar to get an answer to. So it would really appreciate as many of you as possible completing this poll. I'll just leave that running in the background there, and I'll just hand to you, Paul, if you wouldn't mind, just to get us wrapped up. Thank you.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Becca, and thanks to the Q&As that came in. Some great questions, which helps us get to the bottom of what you're looking for, and keep those questions coming in when you've got the slides, and we'll do our best to get answers to you and try and engage as best as we can with the team from now until August, September time, when all of this stuff will be washed out of the machine. So you have my commitment that we're on this every day, working through it and making sure that we get a good result for Northern Power Grid and all of you developers connecting out there. Thanks for joining this morning. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Paul. So with that, that's the end of today's session. So I will leave the poll up there in case anyone can please quickly take part in that before you head off. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and feel free to drop off the webinar. Thank you, everyone.